Does Nebraska need 1,000-yard rusher in 2024? We debate next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege, Locked On College, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
All right, welcome in. Hello, Connor. How are you this morning?
Good. Fantastic.
Good,
ready to roll.
good.
I think we're going to embrace debate today on the show.
Yeah, we haven't argued really much at all in the first couple months of the show, but I think we may disagree over this topic. I was listening on Tuesday to your show, driving my kids around, or at least my one who doesn't drive, and you and producer Josh were having a conversation about Nebraska's running back position, specifically how you believe Nebraska should have a 1,000-yard back in 2024, or at least expect to have, go into the season with the expectation to have a 1,000-yard back. Am I correct in that you said this?
It's more of, I think Nebraska should have 1,000-yard back like all the time. Like, I think they should be able to recruit 1,000-yard back. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they will this year because I don't think that's how they set it up, but I don't agree with how they've necessarily set it up. So there's some on-roads that we could get into this topic, but generally I think you have it right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I'm kind of I am of the belief, I'm going to make a bold statement here. I am of the belief that it's not necessary, that today's college football does not require that. Now, if you are able to find a talent like, say, Bijan Robinson, or someone who comes along at the college game, he's like today's version of the great college running back. There were many of them. They were college football for decades. And if you have Adrian Peterson at your disposal as a recruiter, then absolutely you should structure your offense to feature him. But that's, to me, not the structure at all of the Nebraska offense. And I don't believe those players exist outside of a very, very small population. And they're not likely to end up wearing scarlet and cream at Memorial Stadium. So my belief is that Nebraska should aim to have an effective running game with multiple backs. But 1,000 yards is more the target of a generation ago, or even 10 to 15 years ago.
So in the Big Ten last year, 2 players did it, at 1,000 yards. In the Big Ten in 2022, 5 players did it. Those players went to Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Penn State. And then in 2021, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players did it. And somebody even did it in 2020. And that was Mo Ibrahim when they played like 8 games that year, and everybody had COVID the entire time. I don't think it's that hard. I don't think Nebraska should. I do think, I should say, Nebraska should be a place where you do recruit running backs like that. They did it, and maybe this is to your point a little bit, but they've only done it once since 2015, and that was Divine Azigbo's 2018 season, the first year under Frost. But prior to 2015, they had done it 6 years in a row, and they had an All-American caliber running back in Amir Abdullah, and they had Rex Burkhead before him, and they had Roy Halou before him.
And they were more successful then.
They were. And that's what I'm basically asking. I'm asking Nebraska to be more successful at conventionally running the football and being a more successful football team in general. So Nebraska's setup this year would certainly not lean itself to having 1,000-yard rusher. It's going to attempt to get 1,500 yards, I think, from 3 guys. I reminded people yesterday, Mitch, on my show, that Nebraska is not going to, while Nebraska's running stats, just from a team perspective, have looked pretty good over the last several years, and their offense has sputtered. I think they were one of the top 2 rushing, maybe the number 1 rushing offense in the Big Ten last year. they're not going to get 700, 800 to 1,000 yards from their quarterback running the football this year. They have to disperse those numbers in other places, whether it's through the passing game, like we've talked about before. And so, like it or not, Nebraska is going to have to be successful at turning around and handing off the football. And they don't have the big red, safety button to hit to run their quarterback on third downs and threes and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of different arms to this conversation. But I do think it's important for Nebraska to have a lead back. And I just prefer it that way. And you look at some of these teams and these players that have done it over the last few years, those teams are good. Those teams are successful.
Here's what I think: 1,000-yard back or a featured back, someone who's in more than 60% of the time and expects to get the ball, and the defense expects him to get the ball. Here's what I think that takes away from an offense like Nebraska that is essential for the Huskers to be successful. I think it takes away the ability, one, to spread the ball around. And with the way that backs get injured today in college football, whether it's because the defenses attack it differently or it seems like Nebraska has, in particular, we saw it last year with Gabe Ervin and Rahmir Johnson, but it goes back a few years. I mean, even Devine Ozigbo, to get the chance that he got in running for 1,000 yards in 2018, the one time it's happened since Amir Abdullah left, it came up in part because of some injuries. If you're focused on that one player, I think it takes away from what is truly a strength of this Nebraska offense. And that's the ability to really spread things around. And I understand that in your argument, you're not sacrificing versatility for the ability to get someone 1,000 yards. But I think just kind of by the nature of doing that and leaning so hard on one player, it does take things away, like finding ways to get the ball in the hands of Carter Nelson and Thomas Fidone. And I use Carter Nelson first because he's the newest piece to this puzzle. He showed up on campus this week. So we know about a lot of the other guys. You need to get the ball to Ja'Cory Barney. You need to get the ball to Rahmir Johnson, who's one of these running backs that we're talking about. If in 2024, and this becomes a blueprint for seasons ahead, let's say Gabe Ervin runs for 550 to 600 yards. He stays healthy for essentially the first time in his career. Emmett Johnson runs for 400 to 450. Rahmir Johnson gains 300 to 350 on the ground, and he catches 30 passes. And because of that, you're able to really spread things around to what I think can be a strength for this Nebraska offense, the wide receivers and tight ends. And you can get like Janiron Bonner involved and get him the ball out of the backfield a few times. I really think it makes Nebraska more difficult to defend. And that kind of an offense, to me, probably does not feature a 1,000-yard back.
But can you recruit high-level running backs without showing them that you're going to get 1,000 yards? And this is just some like fake pie in the sky number, 1,000 yards, but it's a good barometer for people. But I don't know that if Nebraska shows on their ledger for the first 3-4 years, whatever it is, of Matt Rule's tenure, that they have no single running back who's run for over 500 yards or 600 yards, that they're going to be able to go out on the recruiting trail and say, hey, I know you got offers from everybody in the country, but why don't you come here and pass block for us a little bit? Like, that's not a great recruiting tool.
Yeah, I think the game has just changed from the NFL level on down. And there aren't as many of those running backs, obviously, in high school. Now, there's some who play in run-oriented systems that are nothing like the pro-style system that Nebraska sees at the level above and is trying to emulate. But, it starts up at the top. And you look at this trend in the NFL. In 24, there were no running backs taken in the first round, just 2 in the first 80 picks of the NFL draft, which is wild. Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. Those are your 2 NFL draft picks in the first 80. Blake Corum was down there shortly thereafter, and he was a traditional, strong, very good, hang your hat on this guy kind of running back. And they won a national championship with him doing that. But the trend at the top from the NFL to down to high school, in 23, you had 2 first-round picks as running backs. In 22, there were none. In 21, there were 2. In 2020, there was one, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So it's like the day of the star running back, I think is kind of going away.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt about it. And to your point, Mitch, like Nebraska is trying to position itself as an NFL style program. Like that's kind of how they're going to run it. But you also just mentioned it with Michigan, and they had two, they had two guys who were going to really, get them a whole bunch of yards because they kept it on the ground a whole lot with Corum and Edwards. But a lot of these successful teams out there, they have a running back and they stick with them. And I think just before we, finish this up, I think anecdotally, the thing that has frustrated me the most about Nebraska running backs over the last several years is that they oftentimes will take, what's given to them exactly or less, whether it's finding the wrong hole, the wrong spot to go. And even that happens in pass protection sometimes. And it's like, all right, they have a running back and they have a bunch of running backs who are going to take exactly what is given to them. Nebraska is, throughout its history, is used to having running backs who take what is given to them and then add 5 to it and add 3 to it or add 40 to it. I mean, Amir Abdullah in the McNeese State game in 2014 is a pretty good example of that, and it saved Nebraska horrible embarrassment that would never have been forgotten about. So
had to wait a couple years for that.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff to this, but I do think Nebraska could and should be a place where they can get big backs like that. But that is certainly not the setup for 2024.
If Amir Abdullah or Rex Burkhead or Mike Rozier comes walking through the door, then by all means, build the offense around that player. And speaking to Michigan, a final thought, if you can be like Michigan and have an offensive line in the offensive system so that you don't need to throw a pass in the entire second half against Penn State and win that game, then all right, I stand corrected. I don't think that's Nebraska, not just in 2024, but in in the foreseeable future under Matt Rule and Marcus Satterfield and Glenn Thomas in this offense. So coming up after the break, we're going to take a shift to basketball. We have talked very little about basketball in the history of the Locked On Nebraska podcast, but there was some news that happened on Tuesday that we want to get to. So that is coming up next. All right, I want to take a minute here to tell you about Gametime, which is a sponsor of the Locked On podcast. We have been discussing the ease with which you can use Gametime to get tickets to a Major League Baseball contest, but how exciting would it be to get on a plane just out of the blue, decide to do it right now and go to the NBA Finals? They start on Thursday, the Mavs and the Celtics. Maybe you want to go. How great would that be? Maybe you're actually thinking about it. Start thinking about Gametime too. It makes getting tickets to the NBA Finals easier and faster than any alternative method. Prices on the app go down the closer it gets to tip. Take advantage of great last-minute deals, all-in pricing, see views from your seat. So just take the guesswork out of buying tickets and use Gametime. It's good for baseball, basketball, football, whatever you want. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Locked On, last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, welcome back. Yes, we're talking basketball. This is probably the first time because we started this podcast after Nebraska basketball had ended their most recent season in the NCAA tournament. And with that, there's been some roster turnover. Nebraska's lost players to graduation. They've lost players to the transfer portal, and so they've had to replace them. So let me introduce you all to a bunch of new players, and there was another new one yesterday. Andrew Morgan from North Dakota State was the first one, and he's a front court player. Connor Essegian, you may have heard of him from Wisconsin. Backcourt, Gavin Griffiths from Rutgers. Backcourt, former pretty highly touted recruit that
sharpshooter.
It did not come together for him last year at Rutgers. Braxton Mia, a lengthy front court player center from Washington. And now Berke Buyuktuncel, joins in from
accent there.
UCLA. I got it. I listened to him say it like 4 or 5 times yesterday from the UCLA website, and then they're adding a couple freshmen as well. So, Mitch, this is an oddly, this is the new era of college basketball where you're just kind of taking players from all over the country and putting them into the cake, if you will. What do you think of what Nebraska's put together so far?
Buyuktuncel is from Turkey. That's what I think.
That's right.
Did you hear Kent Pavelka get his Buyuktuncel game on last night on the social channels?
Yeah,
he's got it down already. It's June. I mean, what a pro.
Now you have to figure it out in the heat of the moment. Like Buyuktuncel gets on the breakaway. Like you have to really sear it into your head before you get into that kind of game.
Yeah, what I wonder is, so obviously Nebraska took some hits like you're going to do every year in the portal with players leaving, CJ Wilcher and others after the season. Mater Diop, I mean, who was considered to be an upcoming athlete in the system, but this is just college basketball. Nebraska is fortunate that it has Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary and Sam Hoiberg coming back from being in the rotation in the 23-24 season, and Rink Mast, who will not play, but he's on the roster. He's having knee surgery. So my question, and what I've wondered as I've seen these transfers trickle in, and I think we're probably done now. There's still a scholarship spot open, but is there really a reason to fill it? Should men's college basketball really have what is it, a 13th scholarship? That's a different question for a different day. But did Nebraska just fill this thing up with players who could play, or is this a strategic move by Fred Hoiberg to add the right pieces to create a Fred Hoiberg kind of team? I'm still trying to kind of work that through in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it's a team that lacks like this. They lost to Texas A&M in the NCAA tournament last year, and everyone was like, "Hey, they need to get more athletic and they need to get more physical," and they just they got pushed around and stuff like that. And that's certainly true, just from an athleticism standpoint. But this team was not built in that image. In fact, it's even built further in the opposite direction, and that's okay. It's a lot more skill. And what you're asking for is, specifically from guys like Griffiths and Essegian, backcourt players who have been known to shoot 3-pointers but haven't necessarily been successful at it, is that they get better shots and more open shots because of Fred Hoiberg's system, and that Braxton Mia can find more space down low to, get free and rim run and get tip backs and stuff like that. And Berke can stretch it out a little bit. So it's certainly an interesting team. I don't think they know exactly, who's in the ball, who's got the ball. It's still Bryce Williams and it's still Juwan Gary. So that'll be interesting to see how they kind of figure that one out. But yeah, it's definitely a skilled, lacks a high ceiling Fred Hoiberg type of team, which for the record, Mitch, I have no problem with. I think it's good that Nebraska establishes a floor as a program and finds a way to get in that top half of the Big Ten every year. And if you get a chance, you get a chance to go to the NCAA tournament, and you see how things go from there. And it's all about matchups. So I'm fine with the way that they've built it, even though it may not be in the upper end dream scenario of what people want from Nebraska basketball.
Yeah, that's not what you're going to get every year. It is such a difficult task. Consider what Fred Hoiberg faces now annually in building a roster in comparison to what it was like for him when he took over the program at Iowa State. And it's like not even the same sport. I think in a perfect world, Fred would like to do things in a similar way to what Matt Rule does in building from the high school level. And it's so difficult in basketball. Even if you're Kentucky, it's difficult to do because older players dominate in that sport, more so even than in football. And you've got to be old almost every single year. And the only way you can do that is to just continue to mine the portal. Nebraska, in addition to Right. Nebraska, yeah. And right. And Nebraska doesn't have unlimited NIL resources for basketball or anything close to it. In addition to the players that Nebraska returned, and we mentioned the big three, and then the transfers who've are coming in this summer. Hopefully, all of them are here soon, so they can get on the court and do whatever is allowed within NCAA rules. Do they have NCAA rules anymore? They're also bringing in Braden Frager, the forward out of Lincoln Southwest, and then Nick Jankowski, who's a guard from Wisconsin. These guys, like high school guys, are just like afterthoughts when you're roster building out, and you hope that they can be patient. You hope against hope that they can be patient and develop into something. But unless you're the head coach's son, everyone on this roster came via the portal, and that's just the reality of college hoops.
You almost have to play freshmen. Like you almost feel like, especially if you have a high recruited freshman that you want to keep in your program for 3 years, like you're almost forced to kind of play them. And hopefully Janowski can get to the point where they feel like they can put him on the court next year. But there's a lot of guys on that roster. So we'll see. Hey, one more thing a couple more things actually before we take a break here. Over the summer, as you noticed, now this week we're minimizing down to 3 episodes a week, and don't worry, we'll ramp back up as we get closer and closer to the middle and the end of July. But we wanted to remind people that if you have a local business, and if you listen to the show, or if you know somebody who has a local business and you want to tell people about it, you think it'd be a good fit, and you want to advertise with us, we'd love to have a conversation. The opportunity is there for you. So get in ahead of football season when we expect to blow this thing up a little bit. But let's talk. Let's have a conversation. Reach out to one of us or via the email at lockedonneb@gmail.com. Mitch, did I cover everything in our short elevator pitch there?
Yeah, we'll put your people in touch with our people and we'll make something happen. So,
hey, one more reminder: if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
all right, back for a final segment on the Locked On Nebraska pod on a Wednesday. Mitch Sherman here. Connor Happer is with me. So, Connor, I fired up the YouTube last night, watched. I think I'm maybe more anxiously await these things than like the average person, but I really marvel at what Nebraska does with its video production and just the ability to put together its different documentaries. So, shout out to them again for another interesting episode of the Chasing 3 doc that came out and debuted on Tuesday night. So as we've mentioned last week when we talked about Rahmir Johnson and some of the underappreciated Nebraska football players, he was featured in this episode along with Thomas Fidone, and it offered a very insightful look into what these two have endured to come back from the kind of injuries that they experienced. I thought Fidone especially was open about the struggles. Consider being a top 2 tight end in the country. Brock Bowers was in his class, and there was debate about whether Fidone or Bowers deserved to be the number 1 tight end in that class. And Bowers is now a first-round pick, and Fidone is coming into his own as a tight end after 2 ACL injuries. So that's just a huge obstacle for anyone to overcome, especially someone who had the expectations that he did coming into the program. And as we saw in this episode, the inner drive. And I think we knew that about Thomas already. It was cool to see them talk to a couple of people inside the Nebraska program about Johnson and Fidone who don't necessarily get all of the spotlight on them or any spotlight on them. One is Drew Hamblin, who has been with Nebraska for more than a decade as a trainer, and he's the director of football rehabilitation. And then Matt Hobbs, who's part of the strength staff, part of Corey Campbell's staff, his title is return to performance coordinator. So those guys do a lot of the same things, one on the medical side, one on the strength side. And they offered a lot of insight into what Rahmir and Thomas have gone through and coming back to be pieces in this offense, I would say, that are critical for Nebraska in 24.
No doubt. I'm usually really, we're skeptical of guys coming off of injuries or trying to pencil in guys who, are haven't done it before to that high of a level, who are going to all of a sudden, kind of take this jump, especially for how long both of those guys have been here. But for Fidone in particular, like, his outlook changes completely, with the sense that, I mean, yes, he is healthy. He is now stacked, months, weeks and months on years of just being healthy and being kind of in the system. But also, I think most notably for him this year, and what he should probably be most excited about, is that Nebraska should have a reasonably decent passing game this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so an opportunity for him to actually catch the ball and catch it in open space. And, I could recall a few times last year when, Fidone became a productive player for Nebraska, but there was a couple times where I specifically just remember him like jumping into the air, reaching backwards for balls that should have been, directly at his chest, and caught him in the, mid stride. And, it just has never felt real smooth for him at Nebraska. And so maybe this is finally the time. I'm excited about him. I'm excited about it, his prospects. And then, Rahmir goes right into that, that 3 running back kind of tandem that I think that they're going to deploy this year, getting, probably 400, 500, 600 yards a piece with those 3 guys and figure it out. I have no doubt that Rahmir can bring that to the table, and then something kind of different in the running back screen game as well.
One other little feature of the of the latest episode was going in depth on the coach to player communication helmet audio that Nebraska is using, that everyone is allowed to use in college football this year. But the company that produces this is called GSC. It's a Lincoln company, actually, and they do it for the Big Ten, the SEC, according to Jay Terry, Nebraska's longtime equipment manager, who was interviewed in this documentary, and have done it for the NFL too. So he showed like the pieces that they mount within the helmets, and then the little walkie-talkie that the coaches hold on the sidelines. And they did something really cool that they could that they could do every week as a feature and like capture the attention, I think, of all football fans. They looped together the audio that the coach, like the coach conversation on, like you were in the position of the quarterback, and they showed a play coming together from this spring, and you could hear the communication that was going into Heinrich Haarberg or Dylan Raiola, like something that none of us here out here in the media outside the program have the ability to give an audience. Like, I wish we did. I wish we could tap into the headsets, but I don't think, even with Matt Rule, I don't think they're letting us tap into the headset communication anytime soon to share that with the public. So the fact that Nebraska did that even for a spring scrimmage was just super cool, and I'd recommend people going and checking that thing out if they haven't seen the episode already.
I love mic'd up stuff. I love behind the scenes stuff. So yeah, this is definitely right up my alley.
There was also a part, I don't know if how many people will catch this, but there was a part of the Fidone segment where they were going back to his first injury at Nebraska, and Fidone was talking, and I believe it was the trainer Drew Hamblin, who was talking about how Thomas had started to come into his own at the time, right before the injury. And they played this, it sounded like something from a time capsule, like the way that they tinkered with the audio of Sean Beckton talking about Fidone from an old media availability and whatever it was, 2021 or the spring of 2022. Super cool to hear his voice. And I know he's somebody that Fidone just loved playing for, and not something that's normal for a football program to go back and dig that out from a coach who's no longer with them.
Yeah, no, I mean that is super unique. I didn't watch it last night because I was way too locked into a very important Royals games, but I'll get out some time.
Two little notes before we finish. Dawson Merritt, the 4-star linebacker from Kansas City, who's down in Nebraska and Alabama, is hosting some kind of an event on the internet later this afternoon. You can look that up on his socials. It's like a recruiting update before he goes and visits Alabama this weekend. So that's recruiting today. And Nebraska reportedly has added an offensive lineman out of its satellite camps in Texas. The guys at Husker Online who were down there covering that event have reported that David Hofkin, who is a big offensive tackle, like a 6'8", 275 pounds, accepted an offer on the spot from Evan Cooper and the Nebraska coaches who were down there, Donovan Raiola, Terrence Knighton. So that's something to watch in the coming days for more news about who this guy is. Originally from Germany, part of the international contingent at these camps.
I watched a video interview that Sean of Husker Online, Sean Callahan of Husker Online did with them, and he was kind of telling a story. So he's 22 years old, and he was originally going to play in America a few years ago when 18-year-olds do. He was offered to UMass. It sounded like he was going to go there. It didn't work out for him. Stopped playing football for a couple of years altogether, and has just now picked it up over the last 2 years. Went to this camp and picked up an offer from Nebraska. He also mentioned that he currently works at a drugstore 25 hours a week as a, just to kind of supplement his, try to drive his income there a little bit. And he didn't know anything about Nebraska really at all. But he's going to try and get up here in the next couple of weeks, it sounds like. So yeah. What an odd thing. But definitely has the physical traits, like his wingspan is really long. So obviously it would take quite a while for him to get on the field for Nebraska, but an interesting addition nonetheless.
Yeah, we'll see. Put him on the phone with 1890 and he can quit his job at the drugstore. So, all right. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app.